Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Scott Brennan. I'm the Director of Information and Family Support at the ARC of King County, and we're here during our third and final discussion of our series titled Unpacking the ABA Debate. I wanted to just quickly, like I have for the first two sessions, just lay down some ground rules and introduce a little bit about sort of our expectations for tonight. And then I'll go ahead and pass it on to Bridgette, who will be leading the panel this evening. So again, thank you for being here for this crucial discussion. We know that this is a topic that comes with a lot of different emotional investments from very many different perspectives. And we know this because we've gotten a lot of feedback directly about this event and this topic as a whole through the years. And because of this feedback, we want to just start out by making it clear that at the ARC of King County, our role is to present all different types of information that can benefit everybody in our community from multiple perspectives and positionalities. And in doing this and having done this many times, the ARC has seen this tension play out a lot firsthand. And knowing that there's a high chance for that tension to perhaps play out again, we want to lay down these ground rules like right from the start so everybody has a shared understanding. So first, the purpose of this event is to bring people together with a goal of fostering understanding and respect. And so we have our own staff here supporting this event by monitoring the chat and the Q&A area. So under no circumstances, hurtful language or direct attacks on panelists or other people in the chat available, or sorry, none of that is acceptable. And participants who use any like specifically directed hurtful language will unfortunately have to be removed if that ends up being the case. The second point I want to make is that while the word debate is in the title of our event, the event is not a debate in and of itself. This is an event to share information about both sides really of a conflict that continues to be present in our community. And there's no intention of there being some sort of winner in this discussion throughout all of the different sessions that we're hosting. The third point is that under no circumstance are panelists or speakers to be harassed, whether that be before or after or during the event. We, as the ARC of King County, take this really seriously. The safety of our community is very important to us. So some of our speakers may or may not wish to share contact information after the conclusion of the event. So for speakers who do not wish to share that information, please respect that. And, you know, I mentioned this for the first two sessions that we've hosted as well. Like, we say this because it has happened in the past before, and we want to prevent it from happening again. Fourth, I want to be mindful, and I hope you will be mindful too, that while sharing information, there's a lot of chance for information and opinion to kind of be conflated with one another. The ARC of King County works really hard to avoid the spread of misinformation, and we're going to continue to work hard to do that during this event. So, you know, just please be mindful when sharing information in the chat. We recognize that it's an incredibly blurry line in this discussion between what's opinion, what's facts, what's, you know, just a thought, and then also, of course, people's literal lived experience. So given that all of these things are going to be coming up and there's no black and white, you know, in this discussion, we're going to just do our best to evenly weigh in on all of the different sides of the discussion. And then finally, please use the chat feature for your comments, and please use the Q&A feature as well. We encourage people to do that and encourage people to participate, but I also want to just note that we don't want to direct much attention away from our panelists, right? They're here to share their experiences with all of you. And I know it's easy for things to kind of get derailed in the chat feature sometimes, especially during discussions like this one. So please, please, please be mindful. And yeah, our panelist is really awesome. I've enjoyed just chatting with them for the first few minutes already, hearing a little bit about them. Before I pass it over to Bridgette, I just want to do a little poll to get an idea of who we have here today. So I'm going to pull that up right now. It should pop up on your screen. So please go ahead and answer that poll when you have a moment to. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to my colleague, Bridgette Nichol, to introduce our panel this evening. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Bridgette Nichol, and just to give a quick description, I am in my early 30s. I have pretty pale white skin and longish brown hair and wearing glasses. And there's as has been noticed, a cat tree on a window behind me, which may or may not be occupied by a cat at some point, or she'll show up in my face. Who knows? So I will say a little more about myself and what I'm doing here first, I guess. I was a recent employee of the ARC and got to be a part of a program focused on advocacy in early learning, inclusion in early learning, with really wonderful cohorts of parents and providers. And I'm connected most personally to the autistic community as a sibling and an aunt and also a friend, and very intensely feel a desire to build community with folks that is affirming of where people are as themselves and how they are, and that creates room to kind of grow, but also to rest when you need rest and to have difficult times, all of those things. And so I think a big part of that is recognizing our collective interdependence and sort of seeing that each person is bringing different things. And I think that this series has been a really good opportunity to understand more of that and get some very valuable perspectives along where folks are coming from in the really exciting world of ABA. And so in the first panel, we heard from autistics and their direct experiences. And no one is ever just one thing, so that also included some providers and speaking about their really strong sense of responsibility to the autistic community in uplifting and elevating autistic voices and transforming the field. And also from one person who has been, who received services from very early in life, and just kind of why the effects that had and the shame that comes from that, and the sense of pressure and the demotivation of needing to mimic and the trauma of that, and how that still plays out today so many years later, and the desire to be understood in that and really have people come together to evolve these services so that they are the helpful things that we want them to be. And then last week we heard from parents and their experiences trying to figure out like what really is best, what are the options, and how do you know what to do, and so many hours that are being recommended. Is a great sort of final piece to that, and we're going to hear directly from practitioners who can sort of give their diverse perspectives on that. And we have 4 very wonderful folks here who have an array of experiences. And I'll just say each of their names, and then after that, I'll have them introduce themselves a little bit more. So we have Donna Summers and Sarah McKim-Thomas, Jolene Messina, and Sarah Silvaji Hernandez. And so, Scott, I don't know if you wanted to share the results of the poll as well, or if that's something that everybody can already see. But
I can go ahead.
I did share the results of the poll.
Okay, great. So then
Yeah.
we'll
there you go. Here it is again.
We'll move forward then. Just didn't want sometimes you want to see the answer. Do you want
No,
to
totally. So it's up there again right now. People should be able to see it.
Great. Okay, then. So if we're ready to go, Donna, would you be willing to start and just introduce yourself and give a brief self-description, and then tell us a little bit about your connection to autism and disability and the type of work you do and what motivated you in that?
Hello, everyone. My name is Donna Summers, and I'm a terrible singer. I'm Asian woman in her mid-30s. I still believe that I'm in mid-30s. Please don't break my heart. So I have a short, dark hairs. I have difficult to describe, kind of brown complexion, I think. And I'm one of the neurodiverse adult. And I'm mom of two wonderful kids, both of who has developmental disability. And I'm a psychologist. And I was born in Kazakhstan, which is a former Soviet Union republic, close to Russia and China. And I got my PhD at the age of 24, as youngest PhD. My connection to the world of disability, when we came here 3 years ago, we found out that my son was not reacting on usual things. We went through evaluation and through a very difficult process, which I don't want to describe now. We figure out he has autism, or he's autistic, depending how you prefer. And that's became a point in my life when I have to, because became his advocate, became a person who passionate about inclusion, and became a big journey to discover my own disability too. So I'm very happy to see you here. Thank you, Bridgette.
Thank you, Donna. How about you, Sarah McKim Thomas? Would you go next? Do you want me to repeat the question? Or you good?
No, I think I got it.
Great.
I'm a note taker. I have my notes ready. So I'm Sarah McKinnon Thomas. I'm a white woman in my 30s with straight brownish hair, square frame glasses. In my background, in my messy office, there is a iridescent squid hat over my shoulder. So you'll see that as my companion. I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm just going to say SLP from here on out because it's easier. I became an SLP because from childhood I was a language nerd. And in undergrad, I majored in linguistic anthropology. Had no clue what kind of job that would get me, but I did end up going back to grad school to become an SLP. I actually did focus a lot on American Sign Language when I was an undergrad studying linguistics. And so I learned a lot about the deaf community and deaf advocacy, which ties into disability justice and disability advocacy. And before going into grad school to become an SLP, I knew I wanted to work with people who were non-speaking, full-time, part-time, that population I wanted to support. And so I do a lot of work with augmentative and alternative communication. And I would say probably the bulk of my caseload right now are also autistic, as well as being AAC users. I am neurodivergent myself. I don't have a strict diagnosed definition for it right now. Probably I'd say I have the Tourettic subtype of OCD, but ask me next week and that might change. But yeah, I'm excited to be here and share what I know.
Thank you so much, Sarah. How about Jolene?
Hi, I am Jolene. I'm a ethnically ambiguous cisgender Latino woman in my mid 30s. Sorry, I'm talking about myself in third person. And I have long dark hair and black glasses. And I am an ADHDer, so I wrote what I wanted to say down because my brain just tries to say a lot or goes in lots of directions, and I have one mouth to talk, and so I get off task. So I'm a BCBA, and I've been a BCBA for the past 13 years. I'm currently the co-owner of a company I founded called Blooming Abilities. And most of my career as a BCBA, I was the typical BCBA who had the mindset of ABA is gonna cure the world and we can fix it all, and to like spread the gospel of ABA. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I was struggling to be the parent I wanted to be to my neurodivergent oldest child that I really started realizing the field of ABA had kind of a lot of issues, because that's what I was falling back on was my training as a BCBA. I ended up connecting with some amazing autistic advocates and activists. And with, a lot of emotional labor from them, I really started working through my ableism and all those issues kind of coming from that, and recognizing the deeply held, unaddressed and often concealed issues of ableism within the field of ABA. And then I started realizing how problematic ABA was with its cultural competency, and just social oppression issues in general, which are just not being addressed by the field. I just started getting really involved in seeing those kind of issues within a lot of other systems like mental health, medical field, and all of those. So I really started wanting to work using my privilege as a BCBA, because I hold that privilege as being seen as a professional, often of authority. And so I use that to be able to advocate in the fields and in all these fields for better work. But also I do focus on ABA. So that's what I do now.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. And finally, Sarah Silvaji Hernandez, could you give us an intro of yourself?
Yes, thank you. So the first thing is my visual description. I am a non-binary femme person. My pronouns are she and they. My intersectional identities include queer, autistic, deaf, and Penobscot. I have wavy brown hair. I have blue-green glasses on, and I have lights in the background that are serving me currently as my sensory anchor. The other thing that I want to note before I continue is that today, September 30th, 2021, is the first Orange Shirt Day in Canada. I am wearing my orange shirt in remembrance, because every child matters. And we are currently finding our babies. And so I am cognizant of my responsibility here today. So thank you. As far as my identities go, personally, I'm a trine, if you will, of autism. I am an autistic person. I am an autistic parent, and I am an autistic professional. My vocational identity is occupational therapy. On social media, I play the autistic OT. However, I am so pleased to say that I am not the only autistic OT, and I am not the only OT with autism. Both of us are everybody is represented in the field in the way that they identify. And as an occupational therapist, I really have worked to serve the neurodivergent community, neurodivergent as defined by neurodivergent K, meaning that any person, any brain that diverges from the norm. As an OT, I've worked in early intervention. I've worked in mental health. I have worked in academia, and now I focus all of my cookies to advocacy and activism. I was also the first openly autistic person elected to government in the United States. I am also first, in my case, first is the worst in the 3-year ADA lawsuit battle, which is hopefully coming to an end. As far as my professional skills go, and what I bring to the autistic community is pediatrics is my jam and mental health is my jelly. And I often work in those intersections and I bring those. And as I continue to serve in the field, I'm just motivated by my love and commitment to equity and access for all people. And I just want to thank the ARC for the opportunity to be here. Oh, my family, we're all neurodivergent in some way, and we're so rad. It's the best thing ever. So I'm really pleased that I get to bring those perspectives here tonight. So, and I may, my words may stumble a little bit because I'm going to, for visual description, I'm going to show I have a cochlear Osaya implant. And so I am experiencing the range of euphoria and dysphoria as I hear my voice. And so sometimes it catches me off guard. But again, thank you for the opportunity.
We're so grateful that you're here. Thank you, Sarah. So our next question, I will also put it in the chat, but I got it wrong the last time. Okay, here we go. Our next question is going to be, what does working with an autistic person look like in your field? And some of the things you can consider are how long are sessions, what theoretical approaches are used, what kind of things are you targeting, anything like that. So I'm gonna send it back to you, Donna, if you feel ready to take that on.
Okay, so it's very interesting. So I'm a psychologist. I'm 21 in this field, and you understand the psychology is like kind of, still it's my passion, and it helped me overcome a lot of things in my own life, especially understanding myself and now understanding better my son. So, but it's very interesting. When you speak about psychology and you speak about ABA and you speak about autistic community, you speak about different paradigms, a shift of paradigm. And you have to speak about the history, how it was going on. So you have psychologists like Hans Asperger and Ivar Lovas. He was a psychologist and he was clinical psychologist, let's say it. And you take a Skinner, who kind of is psychologist and in verbal behavior, yeah? You take all these ideas which they was using to build this huge field, which has like absolutely amazing instruments, like is collecting data. But why they did it? Because once upon a time, Pavlov in Russia decided to see how it's going on learning for the dogs. And when he was testing them, he figured out that we have reinforcements, we have punishment. Oh, my son is coming.
I want Buzzer Jr.
Oh, okay, Buzzer Jr. maybe is not available, honey. So let me jump soon, okay?
Okay, we can come back to you, Donna. And Sarah McKim-Thomas, do you feel ready to take on the question?
Sure, that's fine. So just to set context really quick, I'm going to speak about what SLP services would look like for private practice. I do have experience working in schools, but just for the sake of keeping things contained and not too rambling, I'm going to stick to private practice. So for just some of the details, the nitty gritty, usually for speech, sessions are about 30 to 60 minutes long. It can vary and most people tend to want 1 or 2 times a week. Again, that can vary. And sessions can be either in the home sometimes or in a clinic office. And there's pros and cons to both of those. And there's reasons to prefer one or both, depending on your child, the client, a lot of different factors. As far as what a session looks like, I'm gonna sort of explain 2 ends of a range. So in most speech sessions are going to fall somewhere in between that range, but I feel like it's easiest just to sort of explain, one end and the other end, and realize that most things are kind of in the middle. So as far as what the activities are that happen in a speech session, they range from being a lot more structured and adult-led or clinician-led to being more open-ended and more child or client-led. And so on the more structured end, that's where you will see stuff that looks a little more like what happens in a classroom. It tends to happen a lot more sitting at a table, doing table work. With that kind of, on this end of the scale, usually you'll see some worksheets, maybe it'll be more drill based. And that goes for any type of speech or language that you're working on. That could be just conversation skills or working on saying the S sound better. All of those can run along this whole scale, this whole range. This more structured style of a session also tends to involve more reinforcers or rewards. And a lot of times a child or a client's preferred items or activities are withheld by the adult, by the therapist, to motivate them to do something that the therapist wants them to do. And so that's over here on this end of the spectrum. On the more open-ended, sort of play-based, child-directed end of the spectrum, sometimes it'll just, looking from the outside in, it'll just look like play. Usually the child gets to select what they get to play with, what toys to play with, what activities to do. And on this end, usually the child's preferences, what they like and what they enjoy, is incorporated into the therapy activity, not withheld for after they do what the therapist wants them to do. Now I'm going to talk about the theoretical basis for what speech language therapy can look like for autistic kids or adult clients. So I talked about what the activities look like. Now we're going to talk about the theoretical basis with the same scale, kind of. Over on this end, we have the more behaviorist based. Now, yeah, speech language pathology is its own field, but it has been heavily influenced by behaviorism. And so over on this end, we have a lot of errorless learning, where there is sort of a correct response that the therapist wants the child or client to give, and they use a lot of prompting and correcting to shape that response. On this end, we'll quite often focus a lot on teaching functional communication skills to replace challenging behaviors, and a lot of focus on requesting things to get basic needs met, requesting food, requesting to go to the bathroom, things like that. Over on this end, sometimes you'll see a lot of work on appropriate social skills, like following the rules of conversation, maintaining a topic, greeting and saying goodbye. And sometimes over on this end, there's a lot more emphasis put on spoken communication rather than other modes or methods like gesture or sign or AAC. And I would say on this end of the scale, the primary purpose of communication is seen as getting needs met. Now, over on this other end, we have a more broad-based theoretical basis that tends to draw from multiple academic fields like psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, a bit from behaviorism, but there's a little more of an eclectic approach over on the other end of the scale here. And I would say that over on this end, You're going to see therapists doing a lot more acknowledging and honoring the child's natural attempts to communicate, within limits to keep them safe, but acknowledging and honoring those, and then demonstrating other ways to express the same thing, but not necessarily making the child then practice it, not prompting them to do it, just giving a lot of input to demonstrate something differently, to express something differently. There's a lot more focus on intrinsic motivation to communicate over on this end. And so, it's all about the child or the client wanting to communicate from inside them, and the therapist helping them to communicate that in the way that is the most effective and comfortable for them. And then instead of the purpose, like over here, the purpose being to get needs met, over here, I'd say a lot of therapists would say that the purpose of communication is to connect with other people. And there's a lot of gray area between those two ends. And any given therapist may fall more on one side or the other. And many therapists may, for some kinds of skills, be over on this end, but for other kinds of skills, be more on this end. So there's a broad range out there of how speech therapists work, do their work, and what they choose to work on. So yeah, that's it on that one from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the very comprehensive answer. So, Jolene, are you able to share a little bit about what, let's see, I don't even remember the question myself, but what working with an autistic person looks like in your field?
Yeah, so just like Sarah, I have experience in homes and also in the schools and just a huge variety of settings. And so, and I mentor a lot of ABA people. So the gist is that autistic children are always going to be the focus of intervention, which in my ability to be free of my work, as a business owner, I've shifted to parents being the focus, because it's often seen in the field of ABA that autistic children have deficits which need to be corrected in order to be meaningful, productive humans of value in our society. Skills are often broken down into tiny steps, but they often lacked context. And there's the assumption that neurotypical standards of how to complete these tasks are superior than any other. And on top of that, independence, hyper independence, need to be able to do everything yourself is a huge focus. And if you need any kind of prompts, it's not a good thing. Behavior is seen as an immediate function of the environment. And so there's a thing that we do called FBAs, functional behavior assessments. And a lot of times it'll just look at what happened before behavior and right after behavior, and talk about the 4 functions of behavior of attention, escape, access to tangible, which is getting something, and automatic, which might also be called a sensory. But in my training, automatic was kind of like that's not really a thing that as much as you think it might be. So there's not, the FBA doesn't pick up things like trauma. Trauma is a very personal, contextually sensitive, and has a lot of history within that person that contributes to trauma triggers. And so an FBA wouldn't pick that up. Emotions, also something very personal and within the person. And because we can't observe it, are not considered contributors of behavior. Sensory differences, when I was in grad school, and I still hear this from new graduates, is sensory differences are kind of not a thing. We used to kind of laugh at OTs who had sensory diets. So sensory differences are not seen as a function of behavior. Although, sorry, no, I'm not going off my notes. In my view, sensory differences can probably be attributed to some escape a lot, like escape functions if you're good at thinking outside your ABA training box. Executive functioning isn't really acknowledged. Child development, we're not trained on any sort of child development. It is not part of our training at all. That's why a lot of people start questioning the field of ABA once they have their own children and start recognizing the disconnects between our training and what children actually are like. And social connectedness are not a thing. We have a function of attention, but it's seen as they're doing it to get attention. It's not seen as a desire to connect, especially since in our deeply ableist training, autistic people can't socially connect. So, and I'm saying that as like, that's not true. Social skills tend to focus on conformity with the rationale that we're protecting kids from being bullied, which is a huge red flag, especially when we know about masking and how that can lead to higher suicide outcomes, and so suicidality. So not an okay reason to focus on conformity. And neurotypical communication is again viewed as superior. Most ABA services for autistic children are somewhere in the range of 20 to 40 hours a week from what is known as a behavior technician. These are people with probably some college training, but then they have a 40-hour kind of training they get on the very stereotypical ABA approaches. A major complaint as a business owner, I've been in the ABA business circles, and it's well known that your behavior techs are where you make your money. They often get paid between $10 and $20 an hour, and insurance pays a lot more than that. And so the way ABA businesses are able to make a lot of money is by having behavior techs offering a lot of hours and getting that insurance money, and the BCBAs provide much less. It's supposed to be 5% of that time. So yeah, that's kind of a gist of what ABA can look like. It can range, but we all kind of come from the same mindset.
Great, thank you, Jolene. That was a really helpful framing of just what the field foundationally or practically looks like, just what to expect. And Sarah Silvaji Hernandez, you can talk about this from the OT perspective. That'd be great.
Sure. So before I begin, I want to thank Donna and Sarah and Jolene for bringing so much perspective into this. And I want to start by just simply stating my position. I am seen as, I guess, hard edge on this, but I believe that ABA has gone past the point of no return and needs to be removed from the field entirely because of the trauma and abuse that is perpetuated, not just on autistic people, but I think it's interesting when we talk about behavior technicians, and typically behavior technicians, especially in more densely populated areas, are people of color. And because of the way that mostly white BCBAs treat their technicians, they are perpetuating lateral violence and racism and further trauma, and therefore, in my opinion, violates the tenets of our field within health, or health as a healthcare ally, to do no harm. I do appreciate those who are reformists, and I see your work and I see you working hard. As an OT, I hold my line and I do what I do. Occupation is everyday personalized activity. The things that we do that occupy your time. We can address autistic people across the lifespan. A lot of the conversation always centers around children, which is wonderful. I am a mom. My name means mother of many, so I collect. I love children, but the reality is OT is seen across a lifespan. So beginning from birth, sometimes you will see OTs in the hospital, and all the way to end of life care, hospice, and within those different contexts, we serve many roles. Again, my personal experience is largely in adult and adolescent mental health. And so I really see the impact of having voice, however it is expressed, verbally, non-verbally, through behavior, or anything, and choice. What I refer to these things as, and what I believe the power of occupation contributes to, is three things: self-actualization, which is the realization of who you are; self-determination, which means that you have the agency and autonomy to make those choices for yourself once you understand who you are; and self-advocacy. So you know who you are, you know what you want to get, and you're able and supported to get it. In my view of OT, or as an OT, or a lover of occupation, it's to support the person that I am working with along the way. Some types of interventions that we talk, like we are guided. I actually have it right here. This is how much a nerd I am, right? I have my framework printed out. I have notes in it. I color in it because this really yes, I am a nerd, thank you. It really guides my practice. And so per the framework, I mean, these are things that I'm not pulling out of the air, but some of the ways that OT can really support autistic individuals include preparation of mechanical modalities and physical modalities. So for example, say you have an autistic person, which obviously we have lots of joint hypermobility, then there may be joint issues. So maybe we need to fashion some kind of orthotic or give some kind of support there. We also support with assistive tech. So typically, we'll hear AAC, light switch. There's so much that we can do with assistive tech, and that's just exploding, expanding in one, not just assistive tech that you hold, but assistive tech in the environment. As an autistic person, one of the things that I love the most, because I have affected temporal, meaning I lose sense of time. My friends and I say time is wonky. We don't understand it. Just simply installing a automatic light that shuts off once you've been still for too long. So that's a way that we can kind of remind ourselves to move and get the things that we need to do. Maybe take a bathroom break, those types of things. Wheeled mobility. Autistic people need mobility support, and this can be because of praxis issues or simply vestibular issues. I've been very interested to see more vestibular programming placed into wheeled mobility to help with people who struggle with both praxis, which is the movement, and balance. That's wonderful. And also with visual field issues, so they don't have to worry about tipping over off the sidewalk. We provide regulation supports. I am a sensory processing nerd. I love it. And sensory processing is different than sensory integration, but sensory. How I love you. We are sensory beings. I
love it too.
Yeah, Jolene, and I actually appreciated what Jolene said. It is interesting to me that sensory is disrespected by a field when we are literally all sensory beings. And so I appreciate those that speak up against that. We provide training. So for example, I find that a lot of autistic adults need training in how to breathe. Sarah, the SLB, Sarah, the speechy over there, may talk about that, is that there's a lot of issues with, especially when we talk about praxis, knowing the sequencing of just how to take a breath. reminder for me. Education, so home modifications for dementia. The reason that I mention this is that in my research, I'm finding that what we call in the autistic community burnout is actually frontotemporal dementia. Which comes about for many reasons, but as we know, autistic people experience chronic sensory dysregulation, which neurologically shuts off access to the rest of our brain. And so the front regions of the brain where you have your more executive function skills, organizing, making decisions, and also the temporal regions where you are experiencing time, also balance, also hearing, are often severely declined. This happens, it is not typical, it's not the dementia we think of often with Alzheimer's. This happens to people who are in their 30s and 40s. And yes, as Jolene mentioned, there's an increased risk of suicidality. The average life expectancy of somebody who is autistic is 42. I, as an autistic person, am 20 times more likely to die if I walk into the emergency room with my neurotypical peer. And that's unacceptable. I don't know what to say other than not okay. We provide self-advocacy supports, identity development supports, groups. We can do this by delivering person-to-person, one-on-one. We can do group health. The outcomes that we seek, I believe, are boiled down to equity and access. We are there to ensure that the people who need to access their chosen occupations, the things that they want to do, have the ability to do so. And if it's not there, why not? We have the privilege of finding those barriers and collaborating or partnering with our clients to pull them apart. And we do this with cultural humility. That is one of the basic tenets of occupational therapy. And here I am here to not just state, I am a hard line on ABA, but I'm also a hard line on being autistic as culture. And so therefore, anything that occupational therapists do should be informed by culture. Is this a reality in the field? I'm gonna make it one. That's all I gotta say on that. It needs to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I can see a lot in the chat that folks are very interested in that research that you might have about the connection to dementia. Thanks for everything that you just told.
Can I jump? Why John is eating?
Yes.
I was interrupted. I'm sorry.
I would love to go back to you.
Okay, so speaking about all this stuff, it's happened because one guy in old time, somewhere in Russia, decided to figure out what's learning going on. And then it's became in different way developed. So if you take Soviet psychology and you take Western psychology, they both was focused on behavior. But the way how they was focused was really different because of different culture, propaganda, and ideology. So here you see behaviorism, then it was a social learning with Bandura, then you get some humanistic theories. We have ABA in the United States. If you go to UK, they don't have ABA. The idea of child development and the needs of autistic kids is different because of different theories and
looks like we might have lost Donna there.
All right, I think Donna may have, oh, you're back now. Okay, you froze.
What's happened
there?
Wow, you scared me. I'm like, Donna, I'm back. What's okay? So if you look for the long-term study, one of the things what you need to know, it's developmental psychology. And it could be different for neurotypical kids and neurodiverse kids. And this is the things what you have to keep in your mind. Developmental milestones are like this normal. So they might not work in specific population. And I really like the point about that most of the tests which we use in our field was not designed for autistic community because it's a different. Most of them, I'm sorry, was designed for white boy and tested on the college students, psychology college students. So they're not working in the field. Every time when I hear parents complaining, oh, my son did Wechsler test and his result is so terrible, I'm like, really? Do you think it works? Do they take into account his different type of the brain, cognitive style, the way how he works with information? And my area is cognitive psychology, the way how we learn. And we have a different way how we learn and understand information depending of our neurotype. And this thing has to be taken into consideration. One of the things what I really as psychology kind of hate when I read some study, the way how they design a study. So like most of the study designed by neurotypical kids, for neurotypical kids, even they include autistic kids. You know, the way how they want to collect information, the way how they want to get some answers and everything else. It's such ableistic. So yes, when we speak about psychology, I really would like to hear a cultural approach and see cross-cultural psychology and see influence of person and his amazing heritage and his tradition and his background. And another big issue is the gender differences. Because, you know, till 2000, it was sex difference. When you read any articles before 2000, it was always sex difference in every field. And if a researcher was male, he's going to prove that males outperform females. Around 2000, situation changed. And they found that the situation may be not right. So the field has a lot of issues, a lot of way to develop. But I think one of the things what I like in psychology, because of different branches like developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, clinical psychology, and big idea about human beings, that it's not only his neurobiology, it's also his personality, it's his traits, it's his gender. It's much more that you can imagine. And when you look on the human, you have to see all this beauty, no matter his tribe, which is difficult. Background, my son is coughing.
Thank you, Donna. I hear so much how, I mean, we often look to research as sort of the answer to things, or the formal sort of, if it's in the research, then that's the final word. But
Bridgette,
really,
do you remember?
sort of helping illuminate how much you can't just take the word of research. John, are you still free to just take one more question, or do you want to?
You remember we shared some research about Black African families and their anxiety level, and how they figure out after 20 years of research that was not collecting right data because they didn't include some question about race and implicit bias and institutional racism. And so for 20 years, when they was collecting data of caregivers, Black caregivers, they was not getting a right result about their stress level and anxiety level. And this is what happened in our field. We have to revise our instrument, revise our tools, revise the way how we collect information, how do we use it, and how we, work with it. Sorry.
No. So I think that's a great, I'm looking at the time, and I think we might want to sort of skip a question and look at our question on, let's see. Well, I don't know. Does our panel feel very strongly about how the field defines success? Did you have a lot that you wanted to say about that? I feel like that you each sort of answered that pretty. Oh, Sarah, yeah.
I have just one thing. Success is, I'll boil it down. Success is measured by the client, and they can change their minds as many times as they need to.
Okay.
Is it successes or not? That's not reality, but yeah, that's how it should be.
Okay.
I'd love to jump in to be able to kind of respond to Sarah Silvaji. So this kind of, I guess, since we're running out of time, shifts to the final question for me. And I just want to say I agree with Sarah. Once I really learned the problems with ABA, I 100% think it needs to be dismantled. It needs to be dismantled and rebuilt within other fields. I wasn't sure if this was me primarily parents or professionals, but there's another field called contextual behavior sciences, which I like better, where it can be rebuilt within. Unfortunately, it's going down the same path that most of these academia fields do, where disabled folks are being left out. So they're kind of othered. And I just went to their conference. It was wonderful. They're othered. They're not really part of the conversation. And to kind of also, you said, I really kind of have this word for it. I think it's a predatory field. Once I see what I've done, the way it was pitched to me, the way we do, like you said, a lot of behavior techs are people of color, and they get brought into the field and raised up as to BCBAs. And a lot of what I see when I'm working with people to help them understand the problems of the field is we paid a lot of money for this degree. We often can't use it for anything else. And it's often people who really like, this was their way out of, towards getting a college education and doing something in the field. And I'm angry because, well, I tried to get out of the field. I started mental health counseling before the pandemic, and then I had to leave with all my kids being home. But I'm upset because all the work I'm doing will be attributed to my BCBA credentials. And that's upsetting to me because I don't think the field can remain. I just don't. And I just wanted to support Sarah in that. So that's all.
Thank you, Jolene. Sarah McKim-Thomas, I know you have you took your notes, and so I want to give you the opportunity.
Thank you.
Before we start,
I can make it much shorter this time than the last one because I'm kind of using the same scale. I'm going to do my hand movements.
Great.
So yeah, success is defined in speech language therapy for autistic clients along a range. On this range, there's a deficit-based sort of scale where the person is seen as having problems or deficits or disorders to do with speech or language, and we fix those. And that's seen as success. And a lot of times there's a lot of focus on neurotypical speech and language communication abilities. And those are seen as the correct ones, and anything else is seen as a deficit or a disorder. And then on the other end is more of a strengths-based, more neurodiversity affirming approach where you recognize what otherwise can be described as a disorder, seen as a disorder, as just a difference. And you help people understand their differences and help advocate for what they need due to their differences and communicate in whatever way works best for them. Whether that's speech, whether that's using perfect grammar, whether that's using gestures, whether that's spelling, we find what works for them from our toolkit using our knowledge. So, but there's a range.
Wonderful, thank you. So our next question is, what should folks look for? Like, what signs would an autistic person or a family look for to see that your field's work is being done well? And what should they look for as a red flag? If they're, a lot of times people come into this, they're referred for services, or they're said like, you need to do this early intervention, or this is your only option. But if someone is really trying to be proactive about what they're going into, what can they be looking for? And if you have any tips on advocating as well for finding the services that they want, then feel free to include that too. And I don't know, Donna, if you are out there. Okay. Jolene, are you able to answer this question?
Sure. So I'm going to also try to fit in an answer to the Q&A in this because it is complicated being kind of feeling stuck in this field. But leaving it would be just pretending the problem isn't still there. And I also have incredible privilege that comes with my BCBA credentials to allow me to speak about it. But this is the degree I have to fall back on until I'm hoping for social work or mental health. But finding an ABA provider that I would say meets the standards that I believe we need to have is like finding a unicorn. Unfortunately, neurodivergence, trauma, and listening to autistics are now kind of buzzwords and catchphrases for a lot of companies too, and they're generally performative actions. Try to see, someone who doesn't focus on just the child, but the entire context. A lot of stuff when I get called in is usually a result of school-based trauma or home kind of stuff. It's never just, you're going in as a BT and just working with the kid. It's never that simple, ever. So someone who openly acknowledges that ABA has issues without any buts or excuses. Someone who's doing work not just to better themselves or their company, but to also change ABA as a field. And like I said, that's one of the reasons I kind of stick with this field is I want to help dismantle it and rebuild it. I just said I went to the Contextual Behavior Sciences Conference, which was on European time. So I was at 2 a.m., up doing conferences or workshops. And probably, a thorn in some people's sides, as I continuously said, well, what about red flags would be dismissing, scoffing, or not understanding sensory differences, or seeing sensory differences as something that needs tolerance building instead of self-awareness and self-advocacy opportunities. Dismissal of diagnostic labels. I don't ascribe to the system that the DSM comes from. It's very colonialist. But labels can help guide our assessment on things such as executive functioning skills and areas to look at. And speaking of executive functioning, if they don't understand executive functioning as an opportunity for self-advocacy, self-awareness, and empathy teaching from the parents, that's a big concern. Again, it's that hyper focus on independence is a problem. Lack of understanding of trauma. Using a trauma-informed lens requires more than just acknowledging trauma exists as a thing. It requires that the work be done by trusted caregivers, not a rotating door of BTs or a therapist they see like every so often. And it must be done with mental health providers when possible. And I acknowledge that there's a paucity of mental health providers that will work with this population without being ableist, let alone if the person is limited or non-speaking. Any support for Autism Speaks, because that shows they really are not listening to any autistic voices. If they ever use the phrase age appropriate to justify any intervention, ignoring distress, withholding comforting, focus on follow through. All of this ignores humans' need for other humans to regulate our emotions. It ignores opportunities for discussion and uses an authoritarian mindset, which we have plenty of evidence to show that has poor outcomes. That's the gist. I could go on forever, so I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Jolene. I really hear the emphasis on how important context really is for each individual child, not just as the environment is the only thing you look at as the facts of the behavior, but really as where a child is and how you're supporting them. But there's a lot to say about all that you said, but thank you. I'll just leave it at that. Sarah Silvaji Hernandez, I see that your microphone is on, so if you want to go next, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. So As far as what to look for, number one, is it an option? Unfortunately, one of the things I did not mention is that for the past 20 years, my family has served as a therapeutic foster family. For the past 6 years, we've taken almost exclusively non-speaking autistic children into our home. And I am proud to say that we have 100% reunification rate with their probably undiagnosed neurodivergent parents. We're a team, and that's a big thing for me. I want to say that therapy is not always an option. I have had court-ordered court-ordered ABA in my home, which is difficult for me. But if you are going to find a wonderful program, something that you should focus on is, does the person, client, child, whoever, do they have the right to withdraw their consent? And what does that look like? The interesting thing to ask when you ask the question, well, what does it look like when somebody withdraws consent? There should not be one answer. There's not one way to withdraw consent. You do not need to follow a protocol, or you don't need to do it in the right way, with the right face, with the right tone of voice. Whatever your no is should be respected. It should have opportunities for self-actualization, self-determination, and self-advocacy. Red flags, I think questions are good. I loved the way that Jolene framed some of her things. And also, so some of the questions that I ask, is the autistic person spoken to or spoken about? Can the therapist describe their cultural humility practice? How do they meet cultural humility? Is therapy focused on the client or systems? Meaning, who is saying what therapy looks like? Is it an insurance company? Is it the medical community? Is it the education community? Or is it the client? It should be the client. The other thing, and I appreciate so many of you talking about trauma, what are safeguarding procedures for micro and macro trauma? Macro trauma means system-wide trauma to the individual. Macro trauma can cause micro trauma, which is more interpersonal trauma that can occur. So that does happen often. And what are the procedures to make sure that, you know, as therapists, we're held accountable for that? And my favorite question is, what continuing education has the therapist invested in to inform their practice? You will find a lot of really good information on where people spend their money. So, thank you.
Thank you. I feel like there's so many things, like I need to re-listen and write all these notes down of questions to ask, and then share these out with people. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah McKim Thomas, you ready to share?
Yep. So I'm going to start with potentially positive signs. And these are all for the positive and the negative, the green flags and the red flags. It is probably worth asking a follow-up question or asking for clarification if you hear a therapist say something about this. So potentially positive signs, talking about neurodiversity or neurodivergence, but again, follow-up questions. Self-determination is a good phrase to hear. Spontaneous language is good. Multimodal communication, that means not just speech. If a therapist talks about the client needing to be well regulated in order to actually learn and benefit from any therapy, that's good. Especially if they talk about co-regulation, that's awesome. If they talk about Gestalt language processing, that is very, very good if they've heard of it and know how to work with someone who is a Gestalt language processor. If they emphasize communication partner education and training, so like was said before, they don't just focus on the client, but they also help everybody else they communicate, or as much as possible. It's good if the therapist provides structure in a session, if that structure is to help the child be regulated and be in a place where they can interact and learn, not to control their behavior. And it's also very, very good if the therapist wants to help the client learn about themselves, including about their own diagnosis. Now, potential red flags or negative signs. PECS, P-E-C-S, like some people just don't know the negatives of it, but ask follow-up if they want to talk about it. Verbal behavior, I'd say, is a definite ask what they know about it. Functional communication training, again, ask what they mean by that. It can be totally benign, but it can also be not good. If they use hand-over-hand prompting, not good. Planned ignoring, not good. Over-reliance on standardized tests. For SLPs, sometimes, there are systems, like the other Sarah was saying, sometimes we have to appease systems, but there are ways to not rely on those standardized tests very much, because again, they don't represent the autistic population. If a therapist says, use your words, or encourages you to do something similar, no, not good. So yeah, that's my quick and dirty, good, bad oversimplification.
Thank you, Sarah. Donna, are you able to give some tips on what folks can look for as sort of good signs and things to watch out for? And also, if you have any advice on advocating, I know that you are a great advocate and support to many other parents. So.
Okay, so when it's come to psychology, it's quite tricky, but one of the things if you're going and looking for psychology as a mental health, like professional, there are some things which we learn as as a students. I remember I attended one of their meeting or webinar, Zach was organizing it, and it was a quite neurodiverse population. And actually I was crying a lot because I was listening about their bad experience with mental health professional and somebody else feeling thoughts. They was like, oh, you're not thinking right, or you don't understand the situation, or you don't get it right. Everything what is this, it's not valid. If you come into somebody and he's telling whatever you think it's not right, or you don't understand it right, pack your stuff and run away. Validation of yourself, of your experience, who you are. I mean, you come into psychology not to be judged by somebody under their lens. Psychology is very subjective, and one of the things we speak about word trauma a lot, but when we come to psychology, one of the things which we learn, do not dig in a trauma. I mean, we know about trauma, but if we don't teach a client to have a coping mechanism, we don't go this as trauma. We don't want to go and expose a trauma to satisfy the self and say, hey, I knew that you had problems here. That will be a red flag. If somebody gonna speak about some traumatic experience in your life and want to focus on this part, on your first meeting, that's like, go away. There are time and opportunity. And other things, how do they keep a relationship with you? In psychology, we have one of the term which called rapport. We should not be, if you are well-trained, you do not judge your client. You are provide some kind of, you're trying to understand your client, you don't judge him, you providing as much possible support for him, yes, and sometimes it causes a different feeling of clients towards you. So somebody could be too much attached because they had some history because of neurodiversity or some other experience, and they're going to be very much attached to psychologists, to a therapist. And if you're there much attached to a therapist, very much, and he's one of the best and know everything, and he's almost the god, I would say it's a red flag. Because somebody used Rapport and I think it's called transfer of the feeling in a wrong way. Will be nice if you will find a therapist who knows a different type of things. I mean, we speak about Gestalt psychology, who know what is a psychoanalysis, at least briefly, who knows about CBT, DBT, who knows about different approach, because different situation needs a different knowledge. Ideally, he needs to have a supervisor. Ideally, he still has to go to some therapy himself, ideally. So red flags. If you're uncomfortable, I would say it's a red flag, trust your instinct. I mean, the person who you come for support and who has to help you as a mental health counselor, he has to do his job. And I feel really bad when I was listening and, and some of the folks who was telling, oh, you like validate my feeling. Like, really? Is it so difficult? So you have to feel that what you experience, what you came, it's the same feeling of validation. If he asks a question, why? If everything what's going as you, it's not only because you're autistic. Because if you're going to tell, oh, I have a problem with work, and he's going to tell, oh, because you're autistic, run away. And that.
Thank you, Donna. So really the importance of recognizing the need for trust and validation and being comfortable within the space up front, not just going straight into things that are going to be traumatic for you or difficult things to talk about. Okay, well, let's see. We have a little bit of time, so I want to give everyone at least a small chance to take on the final question, which is about reform within your field and what you would want that to look like. So I know this has already been kind of mentioned by many of you already, but if you have some more thoughts on that, I'm gonna send it to Sarah McKinn-Thomas first.
Yeah, like Bridgette said, like a lot of what I would say has already been said for this question and for others. I was going through before the last one, actually like unhighlighting certain things on my notes because I'm like, oh, someone else said that already. Oh, someone else already said that. So for the field of speech language pathology, I definitely think there is room for and a need for reform. It would be really awesome if there would be less reliance on the medical model of disability. There are some clients that, I would say many, there are many clients that many SLPs work with where the medical model is appropriate. If you have throat cancer and you had your larynx removed, there are certain medical things that an SLP needs to help with. But for something like autism, the medical model just is not appropriate. And so moving more toward the social model of disability. It would be great if the research in our field included more participatory research, meaning that the people with the conditions being studied were participating in the study, not as subjects, but as the researchers. That would be amazing. It's starting to happen in some other fields, but we need more of that. It would be great if in graduate school for SLPs to learn more about disability rights and disability advocacy and the history of that. It's sometimes touched on, but it kind of just depends on the program you go to. And it would be great, and I think it's necessary that we recruit more diverse SLPs. The vast majority of SLPs out there are nice white ladies. And that I feel like therapists should represent who they work with and who they serve more closely, not just from a cultural competence standpoint, but for representation as well. I mean, I would love if some of my clients, after working with me, would say, hey, I want to be an SLP like her. But I don't look like a lot of my clients. And so that representation just isn't there in a lot of cases. So that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's see. Sarah Silvaji Hernandez, do you want to talk a little bit about any reforms that you might want to see within the field of occupational therapy?
Sure. Yes, reform is needed. And I think that anybody who says it isn't, I don't know what they're thinking, because I think we can always improve, and we have a dedication to lifelong learning, some specific action plans. So we need to divest ourselves from non-consensual therapies. And, you know, that it is often ABA, but there's other therapies that remove voice, like I said, remove voice, meaning the communication and the way people communicate, and choice. That's not okay. It's simply not. And as a profession, as we begin to divest from those types and that approach of therapy, we need to invest in autistic identity. We need to invest in autistic culture. We need to invest in autistic advocacy. We also need to stop saying that autistic advocates need to advocate in a specific way. The reality is that the majority of autistic advocates and activists are extremely traumatized. And so therefore, their communication comes from that trauma space. Being trauma informed means that you are the professional and you are there to serve and you are there to listen and you are not there to judge. You need to hear what they say in the way that they say it. Reform also, Sarah, speechy Sarah, yes. We are still largely white women. Our field was formed in 1917 by white women and a bunch of white guys. And we really have not changed from that. The other thing that's important to mention, our field was formed to serve people who were injured in times of war and people who were in, at the time, asylums. And so all of our understanding has come from that point. And if there's any community that has suffered from implicit bias and stigma, it is autistic people. There was a study that showed that women who were institutionalized in 1950 and diagnosed with schizophrenia were 3 times more likely to have a child diagnosed with autism. What that says to me is those women who were institutionalized were autistic. And maybe also, the schizophrenia diagnosis may have been appropriate, but we have to really commit ourselves to addressing those inequities. The other thing is what I could ask of people, but I'll focus on the OTs. Challenge implicit bias and start with yourself. Work your tension out. There's so in the medical community and in the therapist community, we are groomed to believe that we are right. And we are also groomed to believe that there's a sense of safety in participating in systems, regardless of how they harm our client. That is not true. That is part of your grooming. That sure sounds like a cult to me. So challenge that about yourself, do that work, because when you come in, we should be professional and really recognize that our therapy should not look like what we imagine growing up would look like, or we imagine, living in the world should look like. It's for our client. Sarah said, the education needs to change. Why in the heck are we still using a standardized assessment to grant inclusion into the field? I have to take an exam per the literature. Standardized assessments, these big tests that we have to take in order to get in, exclude people with disabilities. They exclude people of color. They exclude marginalized populations. Why are we gatekeeping? We need to have that representation in the field if we are going to truly serve our clients. And so let's start there. Why do we have a standardized test? And then after that, we can talk about getting more diverse educators in the field and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Jolene, love to hear your thoughts.
So I kind of already mentioned complete dismantling and rebuilding of the field with full acknowledgement of the ableist and abusive roots of our field. It requires the field to take a massive step to the side and uplift other therapies for autistic people, art therapy, music therapy, interest focus therapies. It requires examination and acknowledgement of the huge power imbalance with therapists and the children. Stop touching kids without consent. Besides the use of force, even if it's a prompt, it sets up an already at-risk population for at-risk for exploitation and abuse, for even more exploitation and abuse, because they learn from an early age that this is an acceptable way for them to be treated. It would focus on culture, families, emotions. It would recognize oppression and uplift marginalized voices, step aside, and allow autistic people to lead. But I know that's kind of in disconnect because I say you gotta dismantle it and here's how you reform it. I tell myself that progress is made off other people's work, and oftentimes the work I'm doing I'll never see the results of, and that's really hard. If there's any ABA professionals in this group, what I personally do is when I write my FBAs or any reports to insurance, I put in there that they should be looking at art therapy, they should be looking at mental health counseling, all of those things. I tell them like, this family needs this, or they need to be funded for this, and just really push back on a lot of those insurance standardized forms that say, what are their goals for the repetitive repetitive behaviors. And I say, this is not a focus that should be, or I straight up say it's ableist and turn it in. So there's little things that we can do. And I know when I was doing mental health counseling, for my brief time in there, it is so hard to push back. It is so hard. It made me sick to my stomach every time I challenged a professor. And I think that comes a bit from my interactions with ABA professors when I was in grad school. It was not that fun. Anyways, pushing against that is really hard. I got a lot of, it was virtual, but virtual pat, nice lady. You probably just don't understand what behaviorism really is, when I tried to challenge things, and it's hard. And I don't take every battle that I see, but I try really hard. And I hope that others within the field who really say they care, do it too.
Thank you so much, Jolene. That's really powerful to have some specific things that even if you're practicing within the field, you can do, like when interacting with insurance and when working with kids. Donna, did you want to share any thoughts on reforms that you want to see? I know we are at time, so I totally understand if folks are needing to jump off now, but I still do want to give Donna a chance to share thoughts.
Thank you so much. Sorry, my internet connection decided to betray me again. Should not be surprised. So here I'm back. I think one of the things which I want to see in the field and when it's come to neurodiverse community, is psychoeducation. There are some things that we need to know to better advocate for themselves, like a developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, some kind of idea about social and cultural theories. I don't speak about theory of mind, but there are some basic things. And one of the things which comes with autism diagnosis, even with my like ADD diagnosis and dyslexia, hello. Every time when I look at dyslexia, you know, it's like learning disability, and it's always about how bad is disability, you know, how many difficulties you're gonna have. That like, you know, you're not gonna finish school and how much challenging it's like. But they never speak about strength. That you're gonna think outside of the box, that you're gonna spend a lot of time to train your memory, that a lot of time you're gonna be a pretty good researcher because you have dyslexia and you can read and you will look at this world in a different way. So whenever we speak about disability and disability model, we have to speak about strengths. And when we speak about this field, we have to speak about what our kids have as a strengths. I speak as a parent, what we have. And we speak about one of the things that we have, it's a kids and a lot of things with autism and comorbidity, sorry for using medical term, but we know it's a higher rates of anxiety, depression, the other scary things somebody else already mentioned. So we know all these risk factors. But we have to, if we wanna, oh my God, somebody is very loud on YouTube here close to me. So every time, sorry, I'm like supposed to be psychology and control the time, not always. So when we are teaching our kids advocate for themselves, we have to teach them some buzzwords, some mental health words. Like, it's what do you see? Yes, I see this guy here. I'm sure this guy. So when we see these guys, as we have, have right now sensory issues. I have an anxiety because it's the situation is too difficult for myself. Yes, I sometimes have a social anxiety or something else, and normalize this language. We still have a big stigma, you know, and the autism field, how it's come from disorder, almost like a lot of psychiatrics and psychology in early stage in a history was thinking about autism as a type of schizophrenia, childhood of schizophrenia. So the shift from mental disorder to neurodiversity and shift from stigma, like, I'm sorry, shame on you and go hide yourself and try to mask and please do not show all your differences, to something that you have to be proud of it. I mean, I'm 24. I'm 24. I finished my PhD because I'm dyslexic. And I think every neurodiverse child with neurodiversity gets the giftedness too. I believe it. This is my belief. If we could see this spot in our kids, in our community, if we could see the strengths, this will be beautiful. And if we could be a little bit more human being with better values, I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Donna. So we are at the end of this panel, and I just want to say thank you so much to each of you panelists for sharing all that you have. I'm looking forward to rewatching this soon and taking it all in again. And I can only imagine how helpful all that you've shared is to our guests as well. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us tonight and the rest of the series as well. If you have any questions or anything that you're still kind of wondering about, please do reach out to the ARC and they can help sort of answer questions, connect you to more resources. I know Zach put his email in the chat, and Rachel Nemhauser, who she's been the organizer of a lot of this, so I think you probably have her email as well. Yes, I don't need to keep talking because I don't need to overshadow everything that has already been said. So thank you, all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful night.